Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the first edition of India Diversity Forum's D&I Pe Charcha. When we talk about diversity, we straitjacket ourselves to increasing percentage of women employed in the organization. But where are we when it comes to embracing every form of diversity, such as sexual orientation, genders, specially abled, racial, cultural, religious, etc.? We are gathered here today to take an insight from the leaders themselves on their individual definition on D&I in their organization. To begin the day, I would now like to call upon our Editor-in-Chief, Vidyottama Sharma, to give the welcome address.
Thank you, Melita. Good evening, everyone. On behalf of Team India Diversity Forum, I extend a warm welcome to you all. We at IDF kick off with D&I Pe Charcha today with a discussion on diversity versus inclusion. Which of these is the weightier term? Or is any weightier than the other at all? Which is more important? Or is any more important than the other at all? We all know that diversity is the what and inclusion is the how. Some organizations believe in the concept of inclusion first and diversity later, while there are others that believe in diversity first and inclusion later. So which of these is correct? Or are both correct? Or should both be practiced simultaneously? We need to look at the nuances and various aspects subjectively, depending on the organization's DNA and the level of D&I practice in a particular organization. We have a brilliant panel today to take us through all the threads hanging out at the seams. The panelists will lay threadbare the various aspects of D versus I and make an attempt to saw them together to make the fabric of D&I look wholesome. And we will all then go back to beautify and enhance this fabric with our inputs and our best practices. I'm very thankful to all the speakers for sparing their time for this charcha. So let's begin our journey and travel with the speakers to the various nooks and corners of our offices to understand diversity and inclusion a little better. I hand over to Melita again to introduce our panelists and the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Vidyottama, for setting the context. Now let's begin our charcha on diversity versus inclusion. And for that, I would like to introduce our esteemed speakers participating in this discussion. Gauri Das, Head of HR, Marketing and Admin, India Factoring and Finance Solutions Private Limited. Gaurika Tandon, Head Learning and Engagement, Bennett, Coleman and Company Limited, the Times Group of India. Minakshi Samant, Executive Director, Human Resources, Ingram Micro. Tarishi Kamra, Associate Director, Human Resources, Head Talent Management OD, PepsiCo. Viekas Khokha, CHRO, Diversity and Inclusion Influencer, Dhanuka Agritech. And a moderator for this session is K.N. Murali, Senior Director, Human Resources and Administration, NTT Global. I request Murali to take over now.
Thank you very much, Marita. Let me first start by extending a very warm welcome to all of you, the panelists, the audience, and Vidyottama. It's a pleasure to be here. What we're going to do is, I'll spend a couple of minutes just really introducing in a little bit of detail the importance of diversity and inclusion, and then we'll throw open some questions to the panelists, and after we've heard from the panelists, we will spend some time listening to the audience questions, and we'll speak about this topic, which is extremely important and topical today. Diversity, equity, and inclusion has never been more important than it is today. Organizations have come to recognize and realize not just the social dimensions of the impact an inclusive culture can bring to an organization, but also its significant economic impact. In a McKinsey research study a few years back, gender, ethnic, and cultural diversity particularly within executive teams, were very strongly correlated to financial performance. And this was seen across multiple countries worldwide. That correlation clearly showed that more diverse companies are better able to attract top talent, to improve their customer orientation, the employee satisfaction, and decision making. The companies that have engaged meaningfully in diversity and inclusion have reported that materially improving the representation of diverse talent within their ranks, as well as effectively utilizing inclusion and diversity as an enabler for business impact, is not easy to achieve. And yet, multiple companies worldwide have succeeded in making sizable improvements to inclusion and diversity across their organizations, and they've been reaping tangible benefits for their efforts. But the companies that have succeeded are those that secured the commitment of leaders in the company to the efforts, and equally importantly, held the leaders responsible and accountable for cascading the priority down to the rest of the organization. They made sure that a clear link was established between diversity and inclusion to the organization's business strategy and growth, and also ensured that an inclusive portfolio was crafted that involved prioritizing the initiatives and identified measures and metrics to track the outcomes. And finally, they made sure that the initiatives were tailored for maximum impact, and that meant customizing it across various countries and various unique geographies. But the common thread for the diversity leaders was a systematic approach and bold steps to strengthen inclusion. And what the McKinsey study also found was that based on an understanding of these successful leaders, 5 areas of action were identified as important and crucial. One was to ensure that the representation of diverse talent and their advancement, not just the representation, but equally importantly, their advancement. It also talked about strengthening leadership accountability and capabilities. An important element that they touched upon was enabling equality of opportunity through fairness and transparency, and that is something we're going to talk about to advance towards true meritocracy. It is critical that companies ensure a level playing field in advancement on opportunity, especially as it relates to diversity and inclusion. It also talked of promoting openness and tackling microaggressions, and this is again something that we will sort of touch upon today. And finally, to foster a sense of belonging and a sense of affiliation through unequivocal support for multivariate diversity. I'm excited now to talk to our esteemed panel, each actively working on ensuring diversity, equity, and inclusion in their own organizations. Let me start the discussion with a question to Viekas. Because let's look at the basic question first. And Vidyotama sort of touched upon this when she spoke about it at the start. Why do you think people conflate diversity and inclusion and speak of them as though they are the same? What do you think are the differences, and what do you think is the impact of this conflation?
Thanks, Murali. Thanks. It's a very, very relevant question in today's context because, as a HR leader, diversity helps me measure numbers, while the other side, inclusion, helps me measure the effectiveness of a culture. So obviously, one is easily measurable, otherwise, sometimes doesn't coexist with this, but which is very, very important. I take this whole back to a concept of intersectionality, and where we bring multiple aspects of age, gender, ethnicity, disability, and sexual orientation all together and intersect. Now, when I look at inclusion, I do bring in an understanding of what are barriers to each one of these, and what are the stereotypes attached to each one of these. What would be the benefits that each one of these will bring in? What will be the disbenefits that we perceive each one of these will bring in? So that thorough analysis of all these aspects will help in bringing an inclusive culture where, we and on a plain language, we have conversations which are very friendly related to all of this. We have conversations which are not convoluted by our biases when we come from our home. We have a very, very, we are moving away from that straight-jacketed thinking. So we are open to having diverse views from people so that we contribute to a cause with a much, much better output of prospect. So all this is inclusion. While if the inclusion work is not done properly, if we work on diversity and we look at typically, and we started with the word called woman, and first we go to gender, second we go to woman, and then we start focusing on hiring, and we said, oh, I'm a diverse organization. So I think I land up into a shoe which is which may not fit me at all. So it's very important that I create an environment and develop this environment, and there are multiple aspects that I'm sure esteemed panelists will speak. But these are the aspects that we need to focus on before we go into the aspect of what we need to do. So that is that can easily be measured in terms of its effectiveness once we have this ground completely ready for us to go in. Now, the next question which you had, which comes first and which comes later, I think slowly and steadily each one merges into the other. It can't be possible that you first set the ground for this intersectionality and create that environment and then get to hire or develop a diverse workforce. You need to have parallel working. You need to have ally support. You need to have internal and external allies who work with us. You need to have organizations board. I come from an Indian organization, so I don't have a global organization falling out on certain aspects. So I have to create that within my own board to have a strategic thinking around this, to be able to have a regular discussion on how this could eventually impact my ROI and my presence of my organization in my industry. So I think related to that, the culture part and this part will go hand in hand to create what we aspire at the end of it, and develop a journey. How we want to advance in this journey with diversity and inclusion as part of it.
Fabulous, thanks, Viekas, and I completely agree with you that this is a journey, and having a clarity of thought, clarity of purpose becomes the key element for that journey to be successful. And I somewhere came across a definition which talked about diversity being the what of things and inclusion being the how of things. And I'd love to have someone talk about it. But let me take the question to Minakshi. Diversity and inclusion in most companies does not go beyond simple tokenisms, something perhaps to put out on the social media in this highly social world that we are in, just to be seen as doing something. For diversity and inclusion to go beyond being something that is merely symbolic to something that is substantive and impactful requires commitment, passion, and most importantly, the belief that it is a business and economic necessity for organizations. How do you think this can be achieved, Minakshi? What would you say is the most difficult part of implementing a D&I program? I'd love it if you can relate to something by way of an example of something that you're either doing or you've seen done.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, no doubt about it. Thank you for this brilliant question, Murali. As rightly said, commitment, passion, and belief, I think it's the only thing which will differentiate how serious you are about the topic. Honestly, if you ask me, even if some organizations are doing it for a tokenism, or let's say for making a presence on the social media, I think some of them who are reading these posts or reading the articles or reading in general or getting themselves aware, they get their motivation from these posts, because you never know what will work when. Unless awareness is created and necessity of these kind of initiatives is felt, change will never happen. Imagine 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I think we never discussed this in our agenda, right? Today, every forum we talk about it. We are having today the panel discussion on this topic. So I think creating awareness and making right noise about what you believe in is extremely important. History is a witness, right? I mean, I remember reading history in the school in 18th century. Little bit digression, but I think it is very relevant in today's context. I mean, we had sati system, which was justified as a practice. Everybody followed it without any question until some visionary leaders, some activists felt this is against the basic fundamental human rights. Same with child marriage or remarriage or anything for that matter. Government was compelled to make certain changes in the law, right? Because of the movement, because of the noise, because of the reality was being felt, right? It is not a good to have, it is must have. I think, honestly, if you make right noise, and unless you believe what you're doing is not because it's good to have, but it is must have or need to have, or as a need of an hour, no change will happen in the society. So I would do, as far as my organization is concerned, or my responsibility to drive this agenda in my organization is concerned, I would not do it for business growth or economic necessity, or because everyone else is doing it. I would just do because I think I believe that this is the right thing to do and we must do it. On the second question, most difficult part, I think getting the buy-in from the leaders whom you're working with and have them share the same passion or talk with same conviction is the biggest challenge, because everybody doesn't feel exactly the same way you might feel or someone else who is driving this agenda might feel. And due to the conflicting business priorities, this particular thing can take a backseat because we are not able to immediately show them any results, right? And then it would become a tick mark, because then you are only driving it as one of the agendas. I think we as leaders need to keep hammering the rock till it breaks, because world, I think, is changed by your example and not by your opinion. So having good ideas, good discussions is one thing, and really doing something meaningful is another thing. So that's from my side.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Minakshi. And I completely agree with you. Sometimes it's just that inner belief that drives everything, and it requires a spark. And that spark can easily be the wildfire that spreads within an organization. And it requires, a handful of leaders to believe, handful of leaders to be committed to the cause. And then it becomes the way of life for most people. And I think more and more organizations are heading in that direction. Let me pose the next question to you, Gaurika, and it sort of it ties in with what I asked Minakshi a moment back. As the worker demographic profile changes in most organizations, with more millennials coming into the workforce, ideas of diversity, inclusion have become important reasons why young talent choose to join an organization. Very often, organizations that is still run and managed by people from an entirely different generation. A generation that is often bogged down by biases that are either conscious or otherwise. How should organizations break free of these mindsets and dogmas and which are necessarily which you necessarily have to do in order to make sure that you are in control of your own growth and progress?
Thank you, Murali. A very interesting question, and thank you, Minakshi. When you were talking about school days, I was reminded of a conversation. There's a conversation between my father and my niece. My father is an army officer, a retired army officer now, and my niece is 20-something. She's just started working. And the conversation was where he was trying to say that I don't understand why you cannot call me, or why the folks who work with me, I leave them a voicemail. Why can't they pick up the phone and talk to me? And my niece turned around and said, why do I have to talk to you when I can leave you a message? And actually, they started talking about their workplaces. And my father was talking about a time when there were typewriters and memos. And my niece was talking about a time where she's only talked on WhatsApp and Insta and Facebook, and it's about inclusion. And it came to a conversation where they said, you need to respect me if I'm calling you. Why can't you pick up my phone and talk to me? And she said, I'm respecting you. I'm responding to you on WhatsApp. What's the problem? But if you look at it, this completely converts into workplace, because in workplace you have managers who would have probably been born and brought up in a time where having personal meetings was the only way of connect. And now we're talking about a generation where they just leave you notes and they just talk on MS Teams. They leave you a message and they expect you to respond back in a message. It's like, you tell me what you want from me, just message me and I'll message you right back. So this kind of context comes together. And really very interestingly, when you talked about the multi-generation workforce, well, I represent an organization, Times of India, Bennett Coleman. We're about 185 plus years old. And we, at any point, we have more than 5 or 6 generations working with us. We have people who retire, and we also have young journalists who've just completed mass comm or MBAs who come in. And any time where you have a generation that is working with another generation, the context, the upbringing is different. For example, the new generation that just walked in is talking about remote work. They're talking about things that are important to them is about flexibility. And you talk about the old generation, and I don't mean right or wrong in any way. True to the word, true to the conversation, it's about inclusion, it's about diversity, it's about diversity of thought, perspective. It's just different. And while there's a certain set of people who want to come back to work because actually being in physical work is very important, there is a whole generation which is talking about work's happening. Why do you even want me back at work? And those are real challenges of today. So while we're talking about diversity and inclusion in a different way, we're also talking about preferences. We're also talking about expressions. And that becomes extremely important. And Minakshi, I just differ with you in a little bit. While it's a good to do or a need to do, I think that definition really comes across is what impact is it making to business. It becomes a good to do or kind of tips over to becoming a must do when you know that the impact is so real and real time at that. And Murali, you were talking about people choosing to work with organizations. People choose to work with organizations when they see culture. And they see culture manifested in different practices. You know, for example, we all know that the secret ingredient, or, you know, as the secret ingredient to success would actually mean an organization having platforms or opportunities where people can freely express themselves. And practice and mindset, they're two separate things. You know, I could have diversity as practice, which means I want to have people from different cultures. I want to have people from different background, different gender, all that Viekas was talking about in terms of what diversity really includes. But the mindset really comes in inclusion, which means that I need to give them that environment and ecosystem that they feel they can have open conversations. They know that there are platforms available to sharing ideas and perspectives. Not everybody has to agree with everything. And but the important part is that everybody should believe that they had an opportunity to express what they wanted to say. And as HR, while we can be custodians of policy, process, etc., the actual implementation of all of this happens on the ground with what we call mid-managers. That belly is actually where the fat is. So that belly needs to tone up, because we need to be following all of this in practice, in spirit, in a way that I need to encourage more ideas, and that is where you foster innovation. Because if everybody wants to think the same way and do it the same way, then you're not going to get that leap and in the kind of 4x or 5x growth that we want to do. So eventually, it is these mid-managers who will in their behavior really give you a barometer of how inclusive a workplace are you. You know, are you respectful to each other? So if you get a lot of complaints where managers are yelling or managers are expressing themselves in ways that that their teams do not appreciate, you know that you're not going in the right direction. So it's important to see and get feelers of how inclusive we are. And that would come from certain platforms. For example, in Bennett Coleman, we run a program called Eureka, where it's a scheme where you can talk about anything, and we pose business problems, and people are supposed to give us their perspective of what could solve that business problem for us. And we make sure that every idea that is put in through that scheme gets discussed, gets spoken about. And if we implement those ideas, we involve the people who gave those ideas. So at some point, instead of having water cooler conversations of, this doesn't seem to be working, the organization is not doing this, we say, well, if you think the organization is not doing it right, what is your sense? What do you think is the right way of doing it? Tell us and tell us more. We'll give them that platform. They talk about themselves. They talk about solutions that they have. And if they're willing to implement, we also get them to be on the project teams. So I think it's important that you allow these practices to become diversity advocates of such. So you will have people talk about it. People will talk about it to their peers, to potential workforce that you want to go out and hire, etc. And all of this with one aspect, that there has to be a shared purpose and a shared value that everybody's creating. While we'd like to be inclusive, we wouldn't want them to be speed impediment. Conclusion, you need to work. And therefore, that kind of gets to the boundary of what the organization really stands for, whether it is the organization values, strategic objectives, or whatever else that we want to do. We will still have, all of us will have our eyes focused on that. We will achieve it in different ways, but jointly, we will listen to each other, we will respect each other. And that, I think, will become the true test of how inclusive an organization we are.
Thanks. Thanks, Gaurika. I think you touched upon a number of important points. In particular, I think the idea of respect, the idea of culture, I think it is extremely critical, and I think the true culture of an organization is reflected by that sense of freedom, the sense of openness, the sense of belonging that it creates. And diversity and inclusion is an extremely important part of it. And you spoke about, in one of the earlier sessions we have had in the past, we talked about cognitive diversity. The definition of diversity and what diversity entails itself is undergoing change, particularly as it relates to younger people, as relates to millennials. They want not just the traditional definitions of diversity, but also the ability to be heard, to be able to speak and to be heard in ways different from what it was earlier. Which also brings me to the next question, which is, I'd like to ask this question to Gauri. See, it's now, while we've been speaking so far about diversity and inclusion, it's no longer just about diversity and inclusion. Equity is another thing that is becoming an integral part of this. Well, equity is not something that can be taken for granted, and equity or inequity can have devastating effects on employee morale, productivity, and performance. People really are they paying adequate attention to bringing a sense of equity? And in some sense, Gaurika just alluded to the importance of equity in her response. So what are the facets of equity that need to play into an organization's culture building?
Thanks, Murali. Very pertinent question, because when we talk about diversity and we don't talk about equity, it would not get completed. And Gaurika already brought up brilliant points of this. And I would also like to mention that you talked about definition changing for diversity. And when I first time read about number of definitions, 39 is what I read. Maybe it has increased already. And I was shocked that diversity can be of 39 types. So as a HR professional, it's happening to me. So for others, it's going to be a difficulty for sure. So what Gaurika was talking about, this reminds me a story of Manju. Manju joins a large conglomerate in Bangalore, and she's part of HR team. She has worked in multiple countries, and she's all for diversity. So one of the reasons why she joined this company, because they had best practices around diversity, and they claim that they are one of the highest, they are having the highest sort of diversity in different senses, not only the gender diversity. That's the first thing which comes to everyone's mind. So she's very excited. She goes to work for the first day, and she looks around and she finds there are ex-servicemen, there are people from multiple genders, there are people from different cultures, regions, religions, everywhere, because India is a diverse country anyways. So there are people from all these sort of diverse backgrounds, and she's extremely happy that she's at a great place. She goes for her first meeting. This meeting is conducted by CHRO, and there are 21 members in the team. And they all discuss, they welcome her, and then they talk about he's from there, she's from there, and all of it. And then CHRO brings up a point for discussion. So, and she asked for views from everyone. And the first person to share his views was this ex-serviceman. And she tells him, the CHRO tells him that it's a good idea, but it would not work here because this is not army or this is not defense service. Then our Manju, she tries to put up a point, and she's also told you are too new in the system and you would not be able to understand the intricacies of the system, and let's wait for some time before we take your ideas. So she realizes that this is the scene beyond diversity. There is diversity everywhere, but what happens as a next step is very important. She's part of HR, so she looks at salary structure also, and she realizes that there is a difference in the pay range based on multiple factors. She looks at the policies because this organization allows couples from similar sexual orientation, but there is no policy to cover spouse when such a situation arises. So overall, she realizes, okay, there is diversity, but there's no equity. And that is the most important thing when you want to create that. Because she joined the organization, she loved whatever was showcased in the social media and in the policies everywhere, but reality is totally different. And that's where mindset comes into picture, that if you don't do it from within, it would not come. It would only be in the policies. So what can we do, like second part of the question, Murali, what can we do about such a situation? And I'm sure such situations are prevailing in a lot of organizations. So first thing I would say, it starts from acknowledging that there is a problem, because most of the times we would be happy looking at the diversity ratios that we have a very high ratio of diversity and it goes beyond the gender diversity, and we would be happy about it, not doing anything beyond it. But we need to realize, like they say, that it's not only that you should be invited to the party, but you should be included in dance also. So whether it is happening or not, that is to be evaluated at senior levels first of all, because culture is driven from the top and definitely supported by everyone around. So that is first thing. Now look at job description. How do we define it? Do we say we want people only from those institutes, or we say that we need people only from this age band or this background? Then we are killing that diversity and equity already. So everything starts from job description when we are trying to have people on board. Next process comes again the job equity, the payout, some sort of support which would be required. Simple examples like, do you allow people to go out for lunch because women cannot join dinner all the time? Or do you enforce a dinner after 8 p.m. where women would not be there? So some such sort of support would be required if we want to create that equity. And the most important thing would be leadership, how they are trying to do things. So if these things are done, along with a good diversity policy, which many organizations are already doing, I think we can achieve that culture of equity also. But it has to come from within. It has to come from the mindset. I have worked in Northeast, and I have realized that when people would talk to the client, they will use English. But the moment everybody comes together for lunch, they would speak in their language, and I would be like, I couldn't understand anything. So this piece of inclusion is totally missing, because this is how we have been brought up so far. Now things are changing. Now people are coming up and sharing their thoughts that this needs to change. But we have to put in efforts, not only as an organization, but as a society. I'll conclude with that. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Gauri. I think the Manju persona that you spoke about and that you created, I think, worked beautifully in explaining what diversity, equity, and inclusion is all about, and what that difference really stands for. I mean, you could be diverse, but whether you're inclusive or not, or whether you're an equitable organization or not, is really, it comes from within. It comes from that will to make something happen. So a lot of food for thought for a lot of people to kind of introspect on that difference. So thank you so much. Very nicely said. Let me go to Tarishi for the next question. I want to talk about yours in specific context to your organization, Tarishi. You're You're from Pepsi. You're known for a lot of initiatives that you all drive. What are some of the things that you've done? How have you incorporated, now I'll say, diversity, equity, and inclusion aspects in your organization? And one of the things that if you can talk about is as it relates specifically to talent attraction, but how do you measure the success of your initiatives? Because something that cannot be measured has no, is really not meaningful. So I'd love to hear from you on these things.
Sure, thanks, Murali, and a lot of credit to the other panel members. I think a lot of pointers which have been shared are definitely eye-opening, and a lot of common feelings out here as well. So firstly, I want to start with the fact that PepsiCo, we actually believe in diversity, equity, and inclusion. The philosophy is known as DEI out here, and it's been quite some time that we've been talking about DEI actually. We actually look at raising the bar on talent and diversity as one of the key behaviors in our PepsiCo culture. So our culture is known as the PepsiCo way, and raising the bar on talent and diversity is a very big behavior that we really call out, in our everyday behaviors, how we measure ourselves, how we report back, engagement, and all other things, right? In terms of a DEI vision, things that PepsiCo very firmly believes in, it's actually a 360-degree approach. So we take bold bets on talent. When I say bold bets on talent, it's internal and external. So you look at internal movements as well as external hiring through your talent strategy as well as feeder pipeline. And you're very, very conscious of the fact of, the male versus female positions and external hiring being done there. Also, there is a consistent effort constantly in the, if I may say so, the non-common functions from a women perspective. So we made a conscious effort to move upwards in our diversity for sales, supply chain, and core beverage franchise teams, which is typically not really considered a women's role. We kind of broke the barrier there. And right now in our beverages team, we have 50% leadership roles being staffed by women. So it was a complete eye-opening and a game changer that we had to play out there. Coming to the next point, I would want to talk about the definition of gender inclusion. So when we talk about gender inclusion, we don't just look at women. We commenced our LGBTQAI+ journey this year as well. So we actually identify with all gender identities, and we are very sensitively moving towards the allyship journey, taking care of women as well as the LGBTQAI+ community. And it's a conscious effort. And we are, of course, saying that it's not going to happen in a year. It's not like I'm going to have an out person today. Of course, if I'm going to have, I'll be very, very happy. But that's not the ask. The ask is be sensitive to the community and, let the community come out when they need to be. Coming to the talent development piece, again, capability programs, right? You look at the talent development agenda internally, and one thing that constantly we have a focus on is how many women do exist in our people planning bench pipelines. So when you look at the succession plans, how many women really exist in the feeder roles out there is a constant measure that we really look at, right? Exposure to sector and industry leaders via forums. We constantly check on, the proportions of male versus female really going out there. Developing a network of support and leading with inclusion, right? So we look at, I'll give you an example. We launched virtual childcare services this year. And when we were doing that, we are very conscious of the fact that a male parent may actually need as much support as a women parent, right? We can't really be talking about only women parents when we are looking at situations like that. So there were options like one-on-one counseling sessions, inclusion efforts via training, to take care of parents, as well as overall equitable pay. The point that my previous panelist mentioned out, it's a journey we've been on for years. And in fact, any changes in that will probably surprise us because we've been on an equitable pay, piece, I think, since more than 10 years now, so that. Lastly, I think being consistent on measuring through the 360-degree approach. So you look at employee experiences, you look at success measures through various processes and practice lenses based, beyond representation as well. So you look at all of those things. And if I may give a couple of examples from an impact perspective, our annual org health survey actually reflected that our overall scores moved from 65% to 81% for women. And our overall inclusion index moved up significantly as well. So that's one of the targets which our executive committee carries, not just people, not just me who's leading D&I, but it's my president, it's my EC members who carry this target. So there are quite a few pieces there which we really work on. And of course, the inclusion workshops is the basic standard that we've been doing for years now. So quite a few pieces that we look at. Inclusion is the base of our DEI philosophy. And we are very clear that you may be wanting to improve diversity, but if you're not inclusive enough, you may be hiring, but you will end up losing them. So it's not gonna work. So it can't be a leaky bucket. We gotta take care of both angles at the same time.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Tarishi. We're starting to get questions from the audience, but before that, let me ask each one of you to spend about a minute just quickly giving a message that you think is important to the audience from your own perspective in a minute. Let's start with Minakshi.
Are you going to read the question for me, or?
No, I just said just a quick summary of your thoughts, message for the audience. We've got a lot of people listening. If you had to give a message to the audience, what would that be?
Do what is right, not because everyone else is doing. Certain things are as basic as giving respect, and irrespective of, is it LGBTQ, is it difference of thoughts, is it PDA, it doesn't matter. I think if it is about just human beings, just treat everyone equally, right? I mean, we don't even have to have initiative for that. And we should not even measure the impact, because that's the basic fundamental right of us, right? To give respect to each other. So I would say, just be yourself and respect the basics. Everything else will fall in place.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you. Let me go to Viekas.
Thanks, Murali. I think myself coming from the community itself, LGBTQ community, it takes a lot for us to feel safe. And today I'm a leader, but I've gone through those crests and troughs in my journey. So I feel that we should create safe space for people, and safe space can be also, and I like the idea of, if you're not comfortable calling out or opening up, you are still safe, right? So conversations like you're married, you have children, necessarily needs to be answered are difficult questions for some of us to answer. So I think creating that space environment that everybody could feel okay the way they are, without necessarily being felt right or wrong, is something I'm leaving with audience. And I'm sure there are organizations which are doing a lot of work around that, could be role models to be able to co-create an environment to create a learning for other organizations as well.
Fantastic. Thank you. I think that's so important, that people are able to feel safe, feel that they have, they don't have to worry about being themselves. I think is an extremely important point. Thank you. Let me go to you, Gauri.
Yeah, I'll bring up a short story once again. So this story is of three boys who have got to watch a cricket match, and there's a boundary wall. They are behind the wall. So the wall is 6 feet. One is 5 feet tall, another one is 4, and third one is 3 feet tall. Now there are multiple options that you can do to create that equity. One, you give them 1 feet each. So that's not going to help the rest of the two, because the wall is 6 feet tall. But if you give the first one 1 foot, the second one 2 foot, and third one 3 feet, then it will help, and it will all of them would be able to watch the match fully. That is one solution to create that equity. Another one is to create a net there so that everybody can see everything. So this is how we have to look in the organizations also. We may call it that we are biased, positively biased to create that equity. But I think such a bias would be good because we need to create that environment. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you. Gaurika?
Yes, thanks, Murali. I think for me, it's important that that everybody gets to introspect. You got to see, and it's a secret for yourself of how inclusive are you. Are you just looking for ideas and thoughts from people because you really want them, or because you just want to check the box? And I think that would mean that you would look at yourself and see how many times have I really seeked feedback, or have I seeked choices? Have I seeked options, and then have I really changed my mind because I heard someone tell me, or I was convinced by someone else? And if you have more instances, then you know that you're truly being inclusive, personally, professionally, and in any sphere. So that's what I would want to do. I would really want to constantly introspect, scale myself, and see am I meeting the want and the need.
Absolutely. Introspection, self-realization, I think is fundamental to doing this correct. Let me last go to you, Tarishi, before we start getting, answering questions.
I think I'll keep it short and simple. Simply, I think just be bold, break the norm, and keep a 360-degree approach. You can't just look at diversity. You can't look at only equity. You can't look at only inclusion. You have to look at all three together. Wonderful.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. Let me start putting questions across. I'm not going to pose it to any one individual. I just let one of you answer each of these questions. Just say if you want to answer. My only request is we want to field as many questions as we can. So let's keep the answers to a minute or less so that we can get as many questions as we possibly can in. This question is, as a female employee, I've experienced pseudo-gender diversity where male employees staying back of office hours are appreciated, even if it is non-productive. However, female employees are pointed out for leaving on time. How can one call this out?
Simple. Speak to your managers. If your managers and the skip levels are not entertaining or acknowledging that piece, it's time to relook on where you are.
Just to add here to what she said, don't be in race with anyone, because you are an individual and you have to do your own things and you have to live your own life. So don't go by the norm that everybody is staying back. If I leave early, then I would not get good appraisals. Don't go by that. Do what Tarishi said. Your appraisals also would be good as long as you are productive.
I think the world is moving increasingly to outcomes for everything. Business contracts are built on outcomes. Everything is going to outcomes. So I can't see any reason why this is going to be any different, or this should be any different, right? At the end of the day, people should be measured on the basis of what they provide as an outcome, as opposed to the actual number of hours. I understand where the question's coming from, but yeah, this has to change.
Let your work do the talking, as they say.
Yes. I think the next question, I think we've talked about it. I think, Gaurika, you spoke about it. What would the panel say is the most difficult part of implementing a D&I program? If you want to quickly summarize that, because I think you spoke about that, or anybody else, feel free to jump in on that one.
You said, how do you, I'm sorry, you said?
What would you say is the most difficult part in implementing D&I? I think that pretty much was answered by you. So maybe a quick 30-second summary of that.
It's a mindset, and I think Minakshi touched on it also a little. It's all about compassion, and I think Gauri touched it a little, of how deeply do you mean to want to implement. Leadership commitment is one of it. And I think Tarishi touched about measures. I think all of us talked about all of it. It's about commitment, passion, wanting to do it, and measuring how well you're doing it. Those are all the ingredients you got to get right.
And those are the ones that you need to, because it's relatively new, those are the ones that are difficult as well. The next question is, how do you create a culture where stereotypes are broken and preconceived notions are broken down?
I think it's a tough one. the most important thing is that you have to challenge your stereotypes. And we did discuss, I think it was Gauri, you mentioned about look at your job descriptions. How are you slotting people? Are you saying that we want somebody, so only people with 6 years of experience and an MBA can do this? Well, those are some ways where you're looking at recruitment processes getting challenged. Stereotypes are in terms of, that I do, so we're a newspaper organization. We sell for language papers. So do we only need a person who speaks that language who can sell in that market? Is that right? And would you want to break that? So I think these are small manifestations of how you get to break those stereotypes as HR, as managers, as people, as peers, as colleagues. We're doing it all the time. So it's for us to challenge them. It's for us, and as HR, we have more opportunities because as talent acquisition partners, you can start questioning when people say that I want this and I want that, and forcefully you give them a different set of profiles and say, okay, why not this? And if you start having those conversations more often, you're bound to get to where you want to be.
And just to add,
sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. We can take a couple of them on this. Please go ahead.
Yeah. So I'll take it up because stereotypes. First, acknowledging stereotypes is very important because we come from different backgrounds, diverse backgrounds, and we carry that forward. So it's very important to acknowledge that. But at the same time, it's very important to coach people into how to swiftly change gears in terms of how to do the conversations, and these sensitization workshops could really impact in a longer run how people change their behaviors and their conversations. What questions need to be asked when you are interviewing people? What questions need not be asked? How to do these conversations? I think the close group meetings during these coaching sessions really help in getting close to people and doing those close room discussions. They are not recorded. People feel safe when they express their ideas. I think these are the ways we can help the needle to move, in making people's mindsets change. But it definitely needs to be acknowledged, and we need to acknowledge that it takes time.
Thank you. Go ahead, Minakshi.
Real examples is the best thing to break the stereotypes, right? You show them that it works the other way. That's the only way you can, because otherwise no idea or they are not interested in your story unless you win it, right? So I would say, let's say, for example, a woman can't do a particular job. Let women do the job and show them the stereotypes is broken anyways, right? So I think somewhere show them in real life that these are your problem. It is not a societal problem, or it is not a stereotype per se. You just believe in it, and I just broke your belief, right? So I think somewhere real life examples is the only way to break the stereotypes and create those successful examples in your organization. That's what
I think I spoke about the same piece as well. So calling out and really creating those role models. Whether in supply chain we have like the biggest plant manager women today is versus franchise teams having women there, dealing with the bottler, external bottler, completely complicated an ecosystem, and really really creating those role models, I think, is the way to go.
No, absolutely. And I also genuinely believe that as the profile of the workforce changes, you're going to see an upward pressure coming in, because that's no longer going to be acceptable. What passed off as okay will slowly but steadily go away, and you will see that demand and that pressure coming from below, where people will start saying, look, this is not okay. One thing I've noticed or I've realized is that young people don't have fear. They don't have hesitations. They don't have any reluctance to ask the hard questions that older people do. And you're going to see more of them coming into the workforce and asking the questions that are hard, making it necessary for people to change their ways. And in a talent, in businesses, in industries where there's a talent crunch, you would be left with no choice, and that will create the momentum even where there is talent is available in generous numbers. So let me go to the next question. When thinking about the importance of representing our brand as a diverse and inclusive workforce, we struggle with wanting to represent our employees from underrepresented populations, but we also don't want to tokenize anyone. How do we approach people to ask them to be in our photos without making them feel that way? Who wants to take this one? How do you talk to your employee group and say that, look, this you are somebody that we want to put out there as representing the organization's philosophy and practices around DEI, but without making it seem symbolic?
How can you put somebody out there without making it seem important?
Maybe I take this.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, go ahead.
So I think if your intention is to make it public for a specific purpose, be very open and transparent about it. Make it like a campaign. Yeah, we are driving this organization-wide initiative, and no need to then call these people out, right? If they feel you are doing something with genuinity, they will come forward. And if they feel you're doing it only for the sake of doing it because you want some accolades and likes on social media, they will not do it, right? That's a message for you that you are still not there. Don't even go and publicize it. That's how I see it.
Okay. Another question. This is, in the wake of the pandemic, did FMCG companies need to tweak their inclusion strategies to accommodate work from home pressures? Tarishi, you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. So from a work pressure perspective, I think it's important for the organization to really play that role and really call out and give the flexibility to the folks to really work based on their timings. And of course you can call out specific core hours, but besides the core hours, as we said, it's outcome that matters, right? So that becomes the core of how.
No, I think the question was more around, have you had to do any changes to inclusion or your inclusion policies or strategies, because work from home came in and that necessitated some changes?
We've done that. That's the part I was trying to call out. So we've called out the flexibility pieces. We called out core hours and it's agnostic of gender. We've called out core hours that employees can work on. We've called out no meeting hours, and there are specific no meeting guidelines which have been sent out. They are in line with, say, parents or folks who have kids or elders to care for, as well as we have guidelines like no meeting Fridays. So you're basically trying to give time to people to work as well as to manage and integrate their work life rather than a work-life balance. We kind of are looking at an integrated work-life approach. And the virtual childcare services that I talked about. So that was completely from a COVID perspective that we had launched out to try and give parents that option to try and take care of their kids during work hours as well.
I think we'll have time for two quick questions. Let me put one first. How do you deal with employees who show active resistance to change, especially senior employees, if they're actively resisting it? And the follow-up question that they've got is diversity more important than business growth? I don't think the two are mutually exclusive, and I don't think we are conveying that. But have you seen? Let's deal with the first question, which is around resistance. Have you seen active resistance, and how do you deal with active resistance?
I can try and take that first. So active resistance, you will see. You will be able to see at specific points in time, whether it's specific to hiring, whether it's specific to creating those role models in lack of precedent, especially. And that's where the leadership plays a very, very active role. And when I'm saying leadership, it's the senior most person in the organization, of course, along with the HR person. That, along with the executive council, they play a very, very active role. If we don't have the seniors in the organization really play that role, the layers below will never fall. That's for sure. And that becomes an extremely important part. But yes, I think merit comes before diversity and business goals come before diversity. So I'm a very, very big believer of that. And yeah, sorry, I think Minakshi wanted to add.
Yeah, just want to build on it. I know I'm cautious of time. Active resistance will come when you are compromising or selling something at the cost of business or at the cost of quality. So as an HR head or as a talent acquisition person or as a just a representative of human resources who is driving the D&I agenda, I would not compromise on the quality and the competency of a person just because the person comes from diverse background. I would only hire that person because that person fits the bill and he or she is the right fit for the role. The moment they see that genuinity, the active resistance will slowly diminish, because I think somewhere we are trying to do the tick mark unconsciously because it's a nice to have, right? We still feel it's a nice to have. So I would not compromise on the quality for sure, just because I want to meet my criteria of diversity.
Thank you. The last question, sort of, if I read this question, I kind of wonder how to respond to it, because there is a presumption, underlying presumption, which in itself depicts the problem. But let me put it out there. To have the same salary structure in a diverse workforce, is it fair from the organization's perspective, considering everyone's output and contribution to organization's growth would be different? This presumes that there is a non-merit based, non-role based difference, and that I'm not sure is the intent. But let me put that to the panel.
That's not true, right? I mean, nobody pays you for being a woman
exactly.
or a man.
So that's why I said the underlying presumption itself is
nobody
not
does
something
that.
that
No organization would do that. So it is basically for your role, and irrespective of whatever gender. At least in our organization, I can vouch that we don't check who is the person, right? I mean, it's just that this role is this is the market value. This is what we need to pay.
Exactly.
So I don't agree with this.
So that's exactly right.
The question could be from an organization which is biased on that, and there could be a traditional organization. So the best way as an HR leader or a culture leader, you bring in more objective analysis of data from the market, basis the roles, redefine the benchmarking basis how your competition is behaving against those roles. And I think those objective data will cross-question that stereotype of bias against that person or a gender, and eventually bring in the correct, the correction in the compensation piece for that particular role. So I think that external benchmarking data really helps in bringing much more objectivity and removing that subjectivity and bias.
Thank you all. That was the last question. It's been a fantastic discussion. I wish we had a little bit more time, and I think this is such an important topic, such an important subject to think about, to talk about. So thank you very much, IDF, for the opportunity. I'm going to pass it back to Melita to close.